Welcome to week 10, which is the Olympics, and one of my favorite aspects of sports. So this is, you saw the end of the match between Alexander Krellin, and if you want to see cool footage, just Google him and watch him, tossing around these, um, these sometimes much bigger people, and to be 887 to 1 going into 887 and 1 going into your final bout. This was going to be his final bout. He was going to retire, and then he ran into a much younger, bigger, and stronger, you know, guy. And this, basically this dude, this kid from Wyoming. That was quite the upset. If I remember at the time, I remember seeing it, and it was all over the Olympics. So sometimes Olympics, does showcase these long, wonderful, amazing careers. It also showcases the downfall for people who hold on just a little bit too long. But the reason we watch is for underdogs, but also to see people dominate. There's all these storylines that run through the Olympics, and we only get them once every other year. Once every 4 years for the Summer Olympics, and once every 4 years for the Winter Olympics. And they go in off years, so it's every even year there's an Olympic Games is the way it works. Okay, so just a little bit about history of the Olympics. In ancient Greece, they instituted the games in order to try to sort of quell some of the violence and the destructive conflict that had been taking place between rival city-states. The view was that we could use sports in order to kind of work out some of our, more aggressive physical desires. And it probably didn't work all that well, but that was the first example of Olympic Games. You'll have like Spartan wrestlers versus Theban wrestlers, and Theban sprinters versus Athenian sprinters, and kind of that type of thing. So it does have an ancient. The Olympics did start in ancient times, like 2,500 years ago. It was resuscitated, however, in the late 19th century by a guy from France, Pierre de Coubertin, who also viewed that sports could be used. He identified that that a lot of the wars that have been fought in the 18th and 19th centuries had been fought over sort of colonialism and fighting for resources, and this disturbed him, and so he came up with the idea of reviving the idea and kind of giving us a slightly different twist to it, having it once every 4 years, having it be in different cities that could kind of showcase their national and local flair, and then it would be about friendship and they would try to encourage different people from different parts of the globe to come, and they put on the first games in 1896. The first, at that point, they just called them the Olympic Games. Today we call them the Summer Games because they were all sort of those types of sports. And, it was skewed towards sports that Europeans played, but they also really courted the United States, and they courted some other countries too. And some countries from other regions did send people, but it was a more European thing initially at the beginning. Well, some countries that were, primarily more in the Northern Hemisphere, Scandinavia, Switzerland, countries like that, advocated for, like we would like to play certain games that sort of can't be played during the summer because you need a lot of snow. And so that they created the Winter Olympic Games in 1924. And so those were the Summer Games and the Winter Games. And initially they were contested in the same year. And then starting in, I believe, the 1990s, they decided to go, just to increase interest and coverage, and therefore make each game a little bit bigger if you separated them by 2 years. And so you'd stagger them. Each summer game would be every 4 years. Each winter game would be every 4 years, but they'd slot in like this. Okay, that's the way it's been ever since. Coubertin believed that the games could bring about greater international fellowship and cooperation, much like the ancient Greeks did as well. Particularly following a century that saw, the two sets of Napoleonic Wars, um, the Crimean War, and other wars. He was very concerned about that. He also appreciated the pageantry of athleticism and said that that we want to make these games. We want to kind of march in with show people showcasing having their own culture, celebrating their own culture. It's not quite the sort of the parade that it was. That it is now. Wasn't quite the pageant that it is now, but certainly by the 1936 Olympics, it was all about pageantry. Of course, in that one, it was Nazi pageantry. He also celebrated the amateur ideal, that these should not be professionals, but that these should be, people who are not, more college kids and, people who are not making money. It sounds good on the surface, and there is an aspect of it that is laudatory. However, some have criticized, and I think rightly so, that sort of the amateur ideal really conspires to allow the upper class to dominate the competition, right? Because these are people who don't have to have another job. They don't have to make this into a job. They can, they don't even need a job. They have means and therefore can kind of train without having to call this their profession. Whereas the people that don't have means, this might be the best way they can make money and still train at the same time. So, that really has come under criticism. I wasn't a big fan of when they started allowing pros into the Olympics, but, there's an aspect of me thinking, okay, so whichever country dominates that sport is going to be the one that wins. And yeah, it's kind of boring to watch, the United States winning a basketball game against, the Dominican Republic 120-40 or whatever. It's just kind of ridiculous a little bit. But, the sort of, when I start thinking about it intellectually and particularly with conscience, it makes sense to sort of reduce the amateur ideal component. Certain technologies have really helped the growth of the Olympics. The first, I'm not sure which was the first one to have a feature radio broadcast, but the first for television was the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. Okay, run by the Nazis. Okay, and really turned it into an international spectacle. Now that television was not broadcast; it was just a sort of a fairly weak signal that only went out to a few people. But certainly by after the war, TV is inseparable with the Olympics, and now they have multiple, they have streaming, and you can watch. I mean, I remember when you had to watch it on NBC, and then NBC got a couple cable, MSNBC, CNBC, and NBC Sports, and so there could be multiple things on at once. Of course, now they're streaming, so it is an international spectacle. A lot of people do tune in, and they tend to tune in for the opening ceremonies, the closing ceremonies, and then I'm not gonna watch badminton a lot, but in Indonesia we'll be hanging on what happens in the badminton tournament. The Americans are gonna be watching probably more swimming or track and field, plus the major sports like basketball, things like that. And we want to see marvel at athletic dominance and revel and celebrate the underdog, and we have different sports that we're interested in. I'm always wanting to see sports I don't get to see. Like, I love curling. I love to watch curling. I love biathlon. People think I'm crazy, but it's kind of interesting because I only get to see it once every 4 years. So why spend time watching all these basketball games when, the U.S. team is going to kill all the other teams other than Spain and Croatia? I want to watch fencing. Okay. I want to, now there's certain things I find very, very boring and don't watch them, but there's sports that you only get a chance to see once every 4 years. And if you watch them, some of them are fascinating. the fostering of inclusive values, good sportsmanship, fair play, uh, there's often people, particularly if you're watching track and field and somebody gets tripped up and falls and they're out of the race, another competitor that also tripped will come and they'll commiserate together. You know, these people competing against each other. They live on opposite sides of the globe. They're probably both trained in the United States. A lot of the Olympic athletes are trained in the United States, no matter what country they're from. But there's a lot of camaraderie. Clearly, there's something called the Olympic Village, which none of us are allowed into. They don't even allow media in there. It's only the Olympics, and I can't remember what it was. It was, you're not talking about that many people. You're probably talking about 3, 4, 5. I don't know how many thousand, but low thousands. That they had 70,000 condoms available for you kind of get the idea. And some of the athletes have confirmed it, that it's kind of like a free love fest in there. International relations of a different kind. So you just kind of get the idea that these athletes have been training their whole lives for moments, and some of them succeed and others fail, and some have horrible injuries, but in the end of the day, they all come together and they kind of build these bridges of athleticism, inclusion, and that's why when we hear about people who are using PEDs, it becomes so distressing. That's why when in the Munich Olympics in the 1970s, the Israeli team being slaughtered in total by some terrorists was such a horrible moment, because these moments are meant for international cooperation. Amidst the competition, there's cooperation. Amidst the direct competitive nature, there are people coming together and celebrating each other's athletic prowess. Okay. They slowly but surely add sports. You have to add sports that appeal to various international constituencies and encourage smaller nations to participate. Nations that don't have much of a chance, but if you don't have a sport that they're interested in, they're not going to show up. There are some of the best storylines. I remember there was a guy from, I think it was Guinea in West Africa, that barely made it across the pool and back. He had learned to swim like a year before. Okay. He learned to swim in a pool at one of the major hotels in the capital city that was as big as a pool that'd be in your backyard. That he didn't have an Olympic size. This is the first time seeing a pool. An Olympic sized pool is gonna be maybe 20 times the length of, or whatever. But everyone cheered and clapped because they understood what was happening. Was this guy comes from a country that was kind of a war torn country, where he probably had grown up in real poverty and faced things that most of the rest of us will never have to face. And had kind of overcome these various challenges. No, he wasn't going to compete with Michael Phelps, someone who'd been, whose family had been like forcing him to swim 10 miles each day since he was, like 2 years old. But that's not the point. He found out that people were looking for, that they wanted Guinea to participate in the Olympics, and that no one had ever participated in swimming, and that he was going to learn how to swim so that he could participate with his for his country. Wonderful success story. Okay. I think there have been encouraging women to participate in greater numbers. In fact, last couple Olympics, more women have participated than men. Okay, but putting in different sports has helped that growth. They've done some wonderful things, like they managed to get the two Koreas, North and South, to march in under the same banner one time and kind of compete together. That was a wonderful moment. It sort of never happened again after that, but it was a good step in the right direction. And there's been kind of other things for a while, a long time. I don't know why they stopped doing this. You marched in, you marched in together as one, and then march out in the opening ceremonies, and then in the closing ceremonies. I think it was starting the 1956 Olympics. There was this kid who actually wrote this letter and somehow got it to the organizing committee right on the eve of, I think it was the 1956 Olympics in Australia. This is like a 16-year-old kid or something, saying, I think it would be so powerful if they don't march in the closing ceremonies, as all clustered into that they all march in together, that we came as in our cohorts, in our national cohorts, but we're leaving together all mixed up together. And they did that for years. I mean, it was still going on, I think, 20 years ago, but they stopped doing it for some reason. I just think it became kind of chaotic, but that was kind of a wonderful moment. There have been some kind of unfortunate things. The Olympic stars, both hockey and basketball send their teams. I mean, football's not big enough worldwide to have a football. You're not gonna have football. Now, for the NBA, it's easy because it's after their season's already over. Okay, so people just go to wherever. The Olympic teams has 3 weeks to have a training camp after the finals, and then they go. Hockey, it's a little bit more problematic because it's in the middle of their season. So what happens is every 4 years in hockey, they take 3 weeks off from hockey season. I think they start 2 weeks early that year, and they end up a week later than usual. And most of the hockey players in the NHL just get 3 weeks off, and those that are on their respective teams then go and compete. Now, baseball is the one that has resisted this, and I think for a very good reason, because they're not so worried about day-to-day players, but baseball, who wants to send Clayton Kershaw overseas and have him get an arm injury and require a Tommy John surgery? Pitchers, if you keep having pitchers, and it's in the middle of the season too. So what they did, and also, that was the main reason, but another reason why is they were like, why would we put at risk our assets in order to make money for another organization? Okay. Now, I think that hockey and basketball are viewing this, we're making money for another organization, but we are growing the global brand. Okay. So baseball, started something called the World Baseball Classic, and it's just, not a lot of people watch it. Okay. So the Olympics became kind of, I thought, very petty, and they removed baseball, because it was being contested by college kids, basically. And in doing so, they removed softball. Okay. So they removed, sort of like one of the flagship women's sports, team sports, got removed. And they removed a sport that much of Latin America really supports and is interested in. So I thought that was a misstep by the Olympic Committee. Occasionally, specific competitions in the games serves as proxy wars, much as they did in ancient Greece. That you have the U.S. and Soviet Union competing during the Cold War. So, like when the U.S. Meets the Soviet Union in basketball, in the 1972 Olympics, that was a big controversy, because this was coming during the Cold War. I had you read about the blood in the water match, water polo between Hungary and the USSR. Just a short while after the USSR went rolling in tanks into Budapest. It's almost like a proxy war, and the Soviets beat us in basketball, and it was either 72 or 76, although it was very controversial. And then we got them back in the 1980 Winter Olympics with the Miracle on Ice. Recent Olympics, I'm starting to get kind of frustrated with the Olympics and World Cup. I mean, I enjoy them both. You know, I talked a lot last week about how much I love to watch the World Cup, but there's a real dark element to it, the dark side of globalism, with autocratic regimes chosen to host, ethnic and racial minorities often disenfranchised due to venue construction. Where are we gonna knock down some rich people's houses in order to put in? We need to build 3 arenas. Whose houses get knocked down? It's going to be poor people get disenfranchised and forced to move, and that's what they did in. I think I had you read about Rio de Janeiro, and they said, "Oh, don't worry, we found other housing for them." But in some cases, the housing was 40 miles away from their job, and they left their job and found sort of lived homeless. Just kind of horrible things like that. The use of performance-enhancing drugs, terror, the potential for terrorism, and elements of gross consumption and commercialization. Okay, just everything is about gross consumerism. Everything is commercialized. In the last Olympics, it was some drunk Americans did something stupid at a gas station and then blamed it on, blamed something on the Brazilian police and kind of created this international incident. Just kind of, it seems like there's always something happening like that that's kind of unfortunate. So, the darker side of globalism, particularly when it comes to consumerism, commercialization, and what, the failure to put into place rules and regulations and restrictions on what host countries can do when it comes to, this venue construction, which historically has focused not only on ethnic and racial minorities, but often indigenous peoples, such as we saw with the Rio de Janeiro Olympics. The worst episode in Olympic history occurred at the 1972 Munich Games. I already mentioned this when Black September, which was a sort of Islamo-fascist terrorist group, kidnapped 11 Israeli athletes and coaches, all of whom were subsequently murdered. And there's a movie about that. Well, there's a movie about what happens after that called Munich. Very good film by Steven Spielberg. It begins with the incident, and then there's there's little flashbacks to it throughout the movie. The interesting thing was it was a group of Americans that helped them unknowingly, because Black September came to where they thought they were supposed to come in, and there was a fence, and they're sitting there kind of not knowing what to do. And I believe it was American marathoners and track and field guys came up and helped them over the fence. They just thought they were helping some other athletes get back into the Olympic Village, but they were actually helping these terrorists. Beginning in 1992, the games have witnessed the decline of the amateur ideal. Professional athletes can now participate even for countries with which they share a tenuous link. So, like, for instance, the basketball player Chris Kaman was able to participate in the Olympics because his grandmother was German. He wasn't good enough to be on the first, second, or probably even third Olympic team. He was a center for the Clippers at one point, but because his grandmother was German, even though he didn't have German citizenship, he could play for the German team. And you have people that like I remember there was one. It was the Brazilians have their first team and their second team in beach volleyball. They tend to be quite a good beach volleyball team. The Americans are probably the best, but and then their third and fourth team didn't make it for Brazil. So like one of them was, I think it was like Latvia or something. And I think the other one was like Switzerland, they just go there, they live there for 6 weeks and they're eligible to play. I mean, it's kind of gotten a little grotesque when it comes to this type of thing. Some highly politicized moments, many of which I had you look at, see little clips on. Jesse Owens outshines his white opponents at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Adolf Hitler refuses to shake his hand. It's a little controversial. A lot of people say, well, actually, Hitler left before that would have been able to take place. And then some people come back and say, well, that's why he left, so he wouldn't have to make that decision. But Hitler didn't shake the hand of Jesse Owens, who really was the star of that Olympics. And in fact, Hitler's propagandist filmmaker, by her name was Leni Riefenstahl. She was this great filmmaker who then decided to become a propaganda filmmaker for Adolf Hitler, which really tarnished her career, and rightfully so. You know, it is interesting. She has this film called Olympia, and it's really about the beauty of the human form and the beauty of competition and athletics and aesthetics. And she just really overly focuses on Jesse Owens. It's hard to say that she was racist when she is really making him the feature of this film, and probably risking a lot by doing that. Of course, then she ends up making other propaganda for Hitler, and you have to conclude that she may not have personally held racial beliefs, racist beliefs, but when you become a propagandist for someone who is blatantly racist, you're racist by association. But it's so fascinating to watch this movie where it's not just him, it's other black athletes too. She's really sort of, I think, showing that the black athlete has arrived and is beginning to predominate. Another one was, I think I had you watch the Blood in the Water match. Less than 2 months after Soviet tanks went into Budapest, Hungary defeats the USSR in the semifinals of the men's water polo match. Hungary and the Soviet Union being two of actually Hungary was the dominant team and has been, not so much anymore, but Hungary historically was the dominant team in water polo. Okay, which is the most violent sport in fact, they wear multiple swimsuits because people will tug them off. And water polo, I believe, even more than maybe not more than the marathon, but I think it's for the length of it. The length of if you take the number of calories burned and divide it by the length of time that you can test the sport, I believe water polo burns the most calories per minute, or there's something like that I've read. It's very aerobic, okay, because you're constantly there. You see there. I mean, they're basically, one guy's trying to drown another guy, and the other guy's trying to keep above the water. And you can't fight him off with both hands because you need to grab the ball and try to throw it in. The one in the Winter Olympics that's the most aerobic, that burns the most calories, is cross country skiing. And then I had you read about the brutal Italian occupation of Ethiopia by Mussolini during the 1920s and 1930s, and then the fact that an Ethiopian wins the gold medal running barefoot in the 1960 Games in Rome, 20 years after Italy invaded his country. And the amazing thing about that was very few people come out of left field these days.